So I was saying that the first poem I'll read is called Roof Nightclub. And if anyone here has been to Jamaica, show of hands, a few people. Anyone here has been to Port Antonio, Jamaica? Yes, a few even luckier folks. It's a beautiful coastal town in the eastern Jamaica. And there's this old nightclub built probably in the 70s. So that's when reggae music was sort of coming into its own. And it's just a one-room floor where when I was a kid in the late 90s, we would go there to dance and have fun. And my ambition was to become a DJ, to DJ at this spot. It never happened. But this is a sort of homage to that place. It's a kind of an origin poem of the place and myself. Roof Nightclub. First, above all, I live forever, and thereafter redecorate paradise in the majesty of the Roof Nightclub. DJ Lucifer at pre-dawn hours terrifies the floorboards to give way to Apollon's abyss, reflecting scarred light on the wall, the mirror alive with tremors. Herons bring news of consolation. I rebuke them for my brilliance and enrich uranium in my cove across Navy Island. The hospital vanishes in the fog, so I arrange rain to restore magenta ginger lilies where my mother walked to born me. Malignant fireflies at Christmas, sorrel then sorrow, such is Kingston. There funky carols seethe asphalt with famine. Forever ends, never a moment holds still here, when sand murmurs through my fingers. I number and chant down stars, ellipsidal as fire ants wit. I think I will be killed once I die, and once again return the super ape to conquer the roof club, rip off Apollon's hell fence, skin him, dance, thundering subatomic dub music, until my rage yields settled choral. A million embers of eyes split from coals to see me loom out the shadow's sunray by the turntable, wearing a splash crown. Thanks. So the poem mentioned a couple of music that are, let's say, native to Jamaica. Dub, Funky Carol is a sort of reference to a standard reggae piece by Toots and the Maytals, and so on. So playing underneath this poem are references to Jamaican popular music. The next poem, which is called Little Music, sort of extends that biography of Jamaican music through biographies or little anecdotes about characters from the town that I grew up in. I think that in order to understand the history of Jamaica, one has to go there and hear the music, not just what you'd hear coming out of the speakers, but the music of how people sound, how people move, the music of life, of living. And so this is what this poem is trying to do, to sort of chart a sketch of how music is central to the lives of folks. And its background is rooted in what's in emancipation. Jamaica gained emancipation in 1832, if my date isn't off. And that was the moment when Jamaican people could openly play music and perform music without the colonizer watching from the sideline. They were now free to play music. So that spirit, that moment, caused the spirit to be free, to be open, and to music to be spread widely and not be policed. So one of the first musics to develop from that emancipation period is a music called ska, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Ska, dance music, very fast, rapid movement, and the beat is, frenetic. And that music came about when Jamaica gained independence in 1962. So it was a more music to celebrate independence. I'm sort of riffing on the epigraph to the poem. And quadrille is a name of a dance that the emancipated slaves would, formerly enslaved people would perform, in which there's a pole planted in the middle of a field, and they would dance around it with ribbons, right? So that's the quadrille dance. And later on, when ska came, they mixed the two. So you have this dance and this music that goes together, ska quadrille. Ska quadrille, ska quadrille, ska quadrille, ska quadrille. What a lot of little music can do. The blind farmer daylights in his cabbage row, going crouched down between leafy skulls' nose. He rises indifferent, far-gazing, as a fine haze disfigures the mountains. A lot of little music can do that. Aunt May opens her oven, and Egypt comes to town. She closes it, and sorrow fills the coves, for she refuses to sing, "O Jerusalem," but would rather say, "Justice and devotion are my riches," which her grandson says to the Ixoras, naturally stroking their small bonfires. Madmen proliferate in the town square. They speak to themselves a shattered civil constitution, more music than music, cracked parchment voices like high tensile fence around the courthouse. Wandering mummies, they had foreseen the past, screech owls and runes, tourist-only beaches, local natives leaving no footprints on the sands of times. That is what a lot of little music does. Rosemary, self-wounding rose, stabs boy blue for dreaming of frost and the iron bird. Boy blue stabs Rose back and marries her twin. All things considered, he is not a dog. All things not considered, he is a dog. Ashabanipal, stammering from yard to yard with vials of ointments and powder to cure body come downness and bad mind, himself a market of fraught in spirits, the seventh angel for whom there is no cure. Nighthawk, through his burden of wisteria, eyes caution signs outside roof nightclub warns. The microchip in Revelation 13 verse 16 will be grafted in all flesh. Eye dreadlocks in moonlight shall not wither like bald heads at sunrise in Midian. Nighthawk, meteors away. The rest hides in smoke. Sundays baked quiet, it is done so soft, like rain on the moon, like curtains parting. And the moon is there, or else the sun is there, full of a lot of little music. That is the sea, there, always amethyst and slightly drunk, like the fishmen on shore, who in near silence look across the bay at the swamp heavy with scarlet ibises, where a lone crecre lives, a king, having fastened to his head a barbed wire crown. He lifts his conch horn and blows out the stars. It can be vicious, and it is vicious to make such renunciation, such rough music, a lot of it disposable, yet none dispensable, rocking every night. So those were the poems for free. These are the expensive shit, as Fela Kuti said. Expensive shit. I'm into that. I'll begin by I'll read two poems here. The first one, if I can find it, I'll read three. The first one is called Sibelius and Marley. I'm sure you're probably familiar with one of those names, right? Maybe two of them, both of them, yeah? So Sibelius being John Sibelius, the Finnish composer, whose music I adore, and Bob Marley, of course, whose music I also adore. And in this poem, I try to put them in a kind of conversation, a cipher, if you will. I think that Sibelius and Marley were trying to go after something very similar, which is creating a national music, a music of identity, a music that seeks to hold the experiences of their people, the cultural shapings, what made Finnish people, what made Jamaicans, Jamaicans, right? At a moment when they're both creating music that rebel against oppressive regimes, you know, regimes of silencing and colonialism and so on and so forth. You know, so I think of them as both rebel musicians, Sibelius and Marley. History is dismantled music, slant, bleak on gravel. One amasses silence, another chastises silence with nettles, stinging ferns. I oscillate in their jaws. The whole gut listens. The air winces white knights in his talons, sinking mare. He wails, and a comet impales the sky with the dual wing of a wasp burning. Music dismantles history. The flambeau in flame in his eyes with a locust plague, a rough gauze bolting up his mouth unfolds. So he lashes the air with ropes and roots that converge on a dreadful zero, a golden age. Somewhere, an old film. Dusk solders on a cold, barren coast. There, I am a cenotaph of horns and stones. And it's, for me, it's you can't mention Marley's name without talking about Lee Scratch Perry, who died last year, was Marley's one of Marley's early producers. He was a musician in his own right, but his instrument was really the studio, the console. So he was one of the architects of dub music, right? Came about in early 70s. He's the first to make a concept album of dub music. And this poem is a sort of appropriation of his voice, not completely, not, you know, it's appropriate in his voice to an extent, so it's in his voice. And so famously, Lee Scratch Perry built a studio in Kingston called the Black Ark Studio, the Black Ark, drawing on the biblical ark of Noah. Was it Noah? Moses? No, Noah. I was testing you. So yes, Noah. No, you knew Noah, yeah. And I'm Methuselah, Noah's grandson. So, and the idea was to just build a place for music, of course, to create music. But it wasn't only music that Lee Scratch Perry brought into that studio or made in that studio. He was an artist in his own right, a visual artist. He painted on the walls. He made these sculptures and so on that he created in the studio. So it was a laboratory and a place to invent, to be curious, to color outside of the margin of society. And even though at that time reggae music was in the 70s sort of has reached its moment. It's now a definitive art. Scratch was already challenging that art. He was deconstructing it in the studio. So what he did was strip away the vocals, for instance, or he would take away certain instrumentation around the music and and find loops and spaces in this new form that he called dub, heavy with bass, and particularly the bass. The bass is the driving force of the music, and then the drums. And how I think of it is, if you consider that the enslaved people who were brought across the ocean in the hulls of ships arrived, and on the passage were languageless. They couldn't communicate with each other, and when they arrived, also they were without their native languages. You know, it was stripped away from them, so they had to start all over again. And so I think Scratch Project at root is that idea of giving language, right? But how do you give language to such a historical pain? You cannot say, I suffered, it was painful, this was so on and so forth. Those expressions end up being meaningless. So you have to create something that is much more felt, much more forceful, much more a language that is not even language. So that's what Scratch was after in that Black Ark studio. But, and this is the last point, near the end of the 70s, he burnt the studio down. He decided to destroy it. You know, after creating great music there, he burnt it to the ground. And I think that's a metaphor for many different things. So this poem is called The Ark by Scratch. The genie says, build a studio. I build a studio from ash. I make it out of peril and slum things. I alone, when blood and bullet and all Christ fucking American dollar politicians talk the pressure down to nothing. When the equator is confused and coke bubbles on tin foil to cemented reef. I built it, a Congo drum, so hollowed through the future pyramids up long before CDs, spin away rootsmen knocking down by the seaside like captives wheeling by the Kabbalah River. The genie says, build a studio, but don't take any foul in it, just electric. So I make it, my echo chamber with shock rooms of rainbow King Arthur's sword keep in, and one for the Maccabees alone, for covenant is bond between man and worm. Next room is Stone Age, after that iron, and one I name Freeze. For too much ice downtown in the brains of all them crossing Duke Street, holy like Parsons. And in the circuit breaker, the red switch is for death, and the black switch is for death, and the master switch is black and red. So if US, Russia, China, Israel talk, missiles talk, I talk that switch I call Melchizedek. I build a closet for the waterfalls, one for the rivers, another for oceans, next for secrets. The genie says, build a studio. I built it without gopher wood. Now, consider the nest of bees in the cranium of the gong. Consider the nest of wasps in the heart of the bush doctor. Consider the nest of locusts in the gut of the black heart man. I put them there. And the others that vibrate at the feast of the Passover, when the collie weed is passed over the roastfish and cornbread. I upset her. I Django on the black wax. The super ape, E.T., I cleared the wave. Again, consider the burning bush in the ears of Kalungi, and the burning sword in the mouth of the fireman, and the burning pillars in the eyes of the Gargamel. I put them there to outlast Earth as I navigate on one of Saturn's rings. I mitre solid shadow setting fire to snow in my ark. I credit not the genie, but the coral rock. I man am stone. I am perfect. Myself is a vanishing conch shell speeding around a discotheque. At the embassy of angels, skeletons ramble to check out my creation dub. And sex is dub, stripped to the bone. And dub is the heart, breaking the torso to spring olive-beaked to be eaten up by sunlight. Thank you, and I'll end with a poem called Sprawl. It's called Sprawl, but it's not that long nor sprawling. It's actually really pinched and tight. But I think it also go into the core of what the couple of poems I've read. You know, the core of Jamaican music. And what it means to be inventive, even though the powers that be were against that. So it's a music that decided to, a people who decided to create a music to celebrate who they were becoming and have become and continue to try and be, careless of what the system is. Jamaicans like to say the only good system is a sound system. I offer that to the President of the United States of America. Sprawl. Amid ice and granite, sea hush and crash, and the profit and the loss. The prophet Xerox in his tamarind shade, and wasp buzz and saw. In the hills, crash leaves, and virgins' suicides right after the election, and November's Janus, and Pontius Pilate's maggot snipers, amen. And fortunately, I forgot to be afraid, and kept my fear in the salt chiseling my face when I read Keats and loved the ash, and put 2 coins in my right palm amid the crashed crop century of wheat, drought, rosary, terracotta, Kali, reconnaissance, renaissance, my nipples, torpedoed and rock the strobe-lit stage show. The Gorgons scintillated Romans foiled the constable's peace, and Herodotus slept as the prophet rose to his chalice and put on his mongrel pelt. And it rained softly and blessed nothing scarce of breath, and grated nutmeg and the tyranny of sugar and pure cream soda enclosed in cinders shook, burst, fizzed, and I found my shape, shifted, ciphered, raw, my total reversal, my total reversal, my total reversal. Thank you.